What would you do if a gang of killers came straight for your door, and the only thing standing between them and your family was a weapon no one in the world had ever seen before? That is not a hypothetical. That is exactly the morning Lin Xiaofan woke up to. But before we get there, let's go back to where this all started. Because nothing about Xiaofan's life looked like the beginning of anything great. He was 16 years old, sickly, barely able to walk a mile without gasping, living in a crumbling shack at the edge of Li family village. He had 5 wives, which sounded impressive until you understood that all 5 of them had been considered unmarriageable by everyone else. He had no money, no backing, no family name worth mentioning, and a body that looked like it would not survive the coming winter. What nobody knew, not even the women sleeping under his roof, was that the soul inside that frail 16-year-old body had lived an entire life before. 30 years of grinding corporate life, studying, working overtime, chasing dreams that turned out to be hollow. And then, somehow, he woke up here, in this body, in this world, with one very clear thought in his mind. He was not going to live poor again. Lu Shishir was the steady one, the wife who kept everything running while Xiaofan pieced together his plans. Her younger sister Yinyan was raw muscle and fearlessness with no volume control whatsoever. Then there was Xiaoran, quiet and gifted with her hands in ways that defied explanation. Cease, warm and devoted, worried about everyone else before herself. And Xiaoqian, still finding her place, cautious but not unwilling. 5 women who had been written off by the world, partnered with a man everyone assumed would be dead by spring. The village had already decided their story. Xiaofan had different plans. It started with limestone, of all things, a crumbling mine near their new house that nobody else had bothered to look at twice. Xiaoran turned out to be extraordinary at the kiln work, hitting a success rate and yield that experienced craftsmen in town could not match. The best professionals in the area barely cleared 20% efficiency. Xiaoran was already at 70 and climbing. That detail planted itself in Xiaofan's mind like a seed. If they could make limestone this well, what else could they make? The answer came from an old memory, a folk remedy his grandmother had used every time he got hurt growing up. 4-herb grass, that stubborn weed farmers pulled out of their fields without a second thought, mixed with crushed limestone powder in the right ratio. Hemostatic powder, medicine that stopped bleeding. In this world, bleeding out from a wound was not unusual. It killed people regularly. Soldiers at the front lines, farmers with axe accidents, travelers robbed on mountain roads. And the towns had almost no hemostatic medicine left. Every last drop sent off to supply the endless war. Xiaofan looked at the weeds growing in uncultivated hills all around their village, and saw something nobody else could see. He saw a mountain of silver waiting to be picked. But first, the recipe had to work. Not in his old world. Here, in this body, in this earth. Shishir stared at the pile of green powder and said what everyone was thinking. This looked like crushed stone with grass juice on it. How could something this simple stop a wound from bleeding? Xiaofan did not blame them. The process really was too simple, embarrassingly so. And in a world where selling fake medicine could get you beaten to death and stripped of everything you owned, the doubt was not just reasonable, it was survival instinct. Then Yinyan grabbed a blade and cut herself before anyone could stop her. Not a small cut, a deep one, blood rushing out immediately. Xiaofan pressed a handful of the green powder onto the wound and held it, hard hammering. Surrounded by women who had gone completely silent, the first handful turned red, soaked through. He grabbed a second handful, pressed it on, sent Shishir for cloth. A minute passed, then another. When he finally lifted his hand, the bleeding had stopped. The wound was already beginning to crust over. Yinyan was shaking, but not from pain, from excitement. In this era, hemostatic medicine was worth its weight in gold. Every box could mean the difference between a life saved and a body buried. What they had made was not much, but it could sell for 20 or 30 taels of silver from a single batch. Shishir, always the practical one, said what needed to be said. Winter was coming. The 4-herb grass would wither soon. They needed to move now. They spent the rest of that day gathering everything they could find across the uncultivated hills, spreading out in groups to cover ground. By sunset, they had cleared the entire area. The next morning, Xiaofan packed the finished medicine into small wooden boxes and walked to town with Yinyan. 1 hour on foot, the first real sales trip. He was only slightly out of breath by the time they arrived. A few weeks of decent food had done more for his body than years of the illness that had nearly killed him. Yinyan strolled beside him without so much as a pink cheek, her stamina something between impressive and slightly unfair. He told himself to stop noticing. He was there to sell medicine. The plan was simple. Set up near 100 Herbs Hall, the biggest pharmacy in town. close enough that anyone walking out empty-handed would spot him immediately. He laid a cloth on the ground about 30 meters from the pharmacy entrance, arranged a dozen small boxes, and opened one for display. Before he could say a word, an old man wandered over asking if the pretty green powder was for his grandson to play with. When Xiaofan said it was hemostatic medicine at 1 tael per box, the old man's voice went 3 times louder and twice as skeptical. The shouting drew a crowd, which was useful, and then every single person in that crowd told him he was obviously running a scam. The whole morning passed. Not one sale. Yinyan sat on the ground looking defeated, yawning, watching over 100 people come to look, and not one of them buy. Xiaofan told her to relax. Selling medicine was about timing. He was waiting for exactly one kind of customer. Then he heard it, thundering hooves cutting through the street crowd. A massive dark-skinned man on horseback, muscles like stacked boulders, an official badge on his belt. Constable Bao Yeshing. That build was impossible to miss from 50 meters away. Behind him on the horse, a second man in government uniform, arms slashed open, blood dripping off his sleeve and hitting the street in a trail of red dots. Xiaofan's eyes lit up. Business had arrived. The constable charged into 100 Herbs Hall and came out moments later with the news. That would change everything. Not one shop in town carried hemostatic medicine. The war had drained it all. His officer, Song Shan, was kneeling in the street going pale, telling Bao Yeshing not to waste time begging at rich families' doors. He had accepted he was going to die. He asked only that his pension reach his family. That was when the old man from the crowd stepped forward and mentioned the young man selling medicine from a blanket around the corner. People immediately objected. Obviously a scammer. 1 tael per box from the ground. The old man shut them down. The man is bleeding to death. Do you have time to go looking somewhere else? Bao Yeshing made his decision in seconds. Take me there. By the time they arrived, Xiaofan had already prepared. He was sitting against the wall, legs crossed, fanning himself with a folding fan he had bought from a neighboring stall. Yinyan had copied his pose beside him. He had told her the act would make them look like mysterious experts rather than desperate farmers, because the kind of people who could afford to buy hemostatic medicine were powerful, and powerful people did not hand over money to anyone who looked frightened. When Bao Yeshing arrived, Xiaofan glanced up, closed his eyes, and fanned himself slowly. He called it spirit powder, only for those with the right fate. Instead of getting angry, the constable's eyes brightened. He figured this calm young man must be some prodigy from a famous medical family, on a training journey. After a few careful exchanges, Xiaofan told the constable to try it first. If it failed, not a single coin charged. He showed him how to tie off the wound above the cut, how to apply the powder and hold pressure, how to bandage it quickly after. A few minutes later, Bao Yeshing pulled his hand away. The powder had turned red, but the bleeding had stopped. The wound was already beginning to close. Song Shan, who had been kneeling in the street preparing to die, stared at his own arm in disbelief. Bao Yeshing was shaking. He slapped 6 taels of silver onto the cloth, took 5 boxes, and stood there trying to find words for what he had just seen. Brother Lin, this medicine works better than anything I saw on the battlefield. You are a true master. I owe you a debt. Come find me if you ever need anything. Xiaofan kept his composure on the outside. Inside, he understood immediately what having the head constable as a connection meant. Nobody would touch him lightly again. After Bao Yeshing left, the remaining boxes sold out in seconds. People who had mocked him an hour earlier were now pressing coins into his hands and begging for more. A man in the crowd, voice cracking, told Xiaofan his daughter had died years ago because they could not find hemostatic medicine in time. That stopped Xiaofan cold. He had been planning to raise the price next time. The market could clearly bear it. He looked at the people around him. Farmers who broke their backs from sunrise to dark and still barely ate, and made a decision on the spot. The price would only go down, never up. And he would make smaller portions at half the size for half the price, so everyone could afford one. The crowd erupted. A young scholar called him a man with a noble heart and others echoed it. Xiaofan felt a little embarrassed, honestly. He was not being noble. He was being strategic. Goodwill in a town like this was worth more than an extra few taels. He grabbed Yinyan's hand and pulled her toward the market to spend some of their earnings on fruit, meat, fish, fabrics, and all the daily things they had never been able to afford. By the time they reached the village entrance at sunset, loaded down with purchases and walking beside a man who had just made more money in one morning than most families saw in a month, Xiaofan's next move was already forming in his mind. The medicine was real. The demand was real. The supply of four-herb grass was running out fast with winter approaching. If they were going to turn this into something serious, they needed help, and they needed it now. He went to the village chief, old Uncle Da, and laid it out plainly. He wanted to hire workers. 10 strong men for the limestone mining at 12 copper coins a day. 30 women to gather herbs at 10. The chief nearly choked. 12 coins a day was competitive with a constable's salary in town, and those positions required connections or military service. These were ordinary farmers, and Xiaofan was offering the same right here in their village. Uncle Da tried to talk him down. Lower the wage a little, at least. Drop the dinner. You are just starting out. Xiaofan agreed to drop the dinner, but held the wages firm. He added one condition that made the chief's face go through 3 emotions into seconds. He needed to borrow some stone mills. Could Uncle Da help arrange that? The chief had been expecting something difficult. He burst out laughing with relief and offered his own mill immediately. Half an hour later, most of the village had gathered at the entrance. When the chief announced 12 coins for men and 10 for women, someone's farming tool clattered to the ground and the whole place exploded. People shoved each other trying to get a spot. Mothers pushed forward on behalf of their daughters. Former soldiers straightened up and tried to look stronger. The chief screened them down and brought 40 workers to Xiaofan's door within the hour. 10 men, all former soldiers, the strongest in the village. 30 women in their 20s and 30s, quick and experienced at field work. He had made sure no to people from the same family and had prioritized the poorest households first. Big Sisterly, a powerhouse woman at the front of the group, asked Xiaofan straight to his face if the wages were real. She explained that workers from this village had followed bosses into town before, with promises of high pay, and came back with nothing, followed by a famine year that killed some of them. Xiaofan did not get defensive. He explained the full system calmly. Wages paid once a month by the 15th. Advances available in emergencies up to what was already earned. Attendance bonuses that grew the longer someone stayed. Work 3 months straight and get 30 extra coins. 6 months, 80. A full year, 200. And the bonuses would increase over time. They had never heard of any of this. Bonuses, advances, a system that rewarded loyalty. Several of them had tears in their eyes before he finished speaking. Big Sisterly looked like she was about to kneel. Xiaofan rushed forward and stopped her. He was 16 years old. Having these aunts and uncles kneel to him would take years off his life. That afternoon they started. The 4-herb grass was already wilting at the edges and every day mattered. Xiaofan sent Yinyan to supervise the limestone grinding since she had done it before, and could teach the others, while Shirshir led the herb-gathering crews out into the hills. He told them to carry 2 baskets each, one for 4-herb grass and one for Ling long grass, a useless weed that would hide the real ingredient from anyone watching. By sunset the women came back with enough 4-herb grass to fill 5 baskets. Turned into medicine, it could sell for over 100 taels of silver. The men came back drenched in sweat carrying bulging sacks of stone, their muscles proof that a day of honest work had already been done. Cease had cooked batches of good rice with rich meat broth, and Xiaofan told everyone to eat as much as they wanted. The workers looked at the bowls of food like they could not quite believe. They were meant for people like them. 2, 3 bowls each. On their way home that evening, they bragged to every villager they passed. By the next morning, other people were showing up at the chief's house begging to know when Xiaofan would hire again. The old pressing method, stuffing grass into bamboo tubes and squeezing by hand, could not keep up with this volume. That evening all 6 of them worked until their arms gave out just to process the day's harvest. Xiaofan had already put in a request with Uncle Li San, the village blacksmith, for a simple mechanical press with a lever and gears. Li San and Xiaofan's father had grown up together. They had gone to war together. Only Li San came home. After that, Li San had brought grain to Xiaofan's house several times a year, quietly, without any request for thanks. Without those deliveries, Xiaofan would not have survived long enough to transmigrate into this body in the first place. When Xiaofan brought 100 jin of grain as payment for the tools, Li San tried to refuse it. Xiaofan argued until the old man accepted. "Between us is one thing," he said. "But this is my livelihood now, and I need you around for a long time." The juicing press Li San built the next morning was simple, a lever and a set of basic gears. But one crank of the handle sent green juice pouring out the bottom. Li San watched a demonstration with half a garden's worth of greens, and stared like he had just seen a magic trick. Nobody in this era had built one before. As far as Xiaofan was concerned, it was his invention, and he planned to improve it. To big water jars replaced the 20 basins they would have needed otherwise. Mix the juice. Add water at the right ratio. Pour in limestone powder. Cover to keep dust out. Tomorrow, dry and sift. A larger bamboo sifter made the final step easy enough that the whole batch could be processed, without destroying anyone's wrist. That night, Xiaofan held a quick meeting with all 5 wives. The workers do the basic labor. The medicine stays with us. Nobody else touches the recipe. He made it serious enough that all 5 of them nodded solemnly, their small serious faces almost making him laugh. He put Xiaoqian in charge of tracking wages. She was from the modern world too. Basic bookkeeping was nothing for her. She agreed quietly, which surprised everyone. They had expected something sharp from her. She just turned red and said she wanted a good life. Was that wrong? Sure smoothed things over gently. Yin would oversee the mining. Xiaoran led limestone production with Xiaoqian assisting. Cease cooked and handled whatever came up. And the goal, Xiaofan announced with complete seriousness, was to buy the big house near the mine. Yin heard that and ran across the room and kissed him loudly on the cheek. Before she realized what she had done, she froze. Everyone was staring. Her face turned the color of a ripe persimmon. That night was energetic. Xiaofan noted to himself the next morning, in a way that made all of it feel worth it. The next morning the town was waiting, and Xiaofan had 100 boxes of medicine to move. Before he could even start thinking about strategy, a message came through Constable Bao's office. He wanted a meeting. The village chief appeared at Xiaofan's door gasping for air, warning him that 2 men from the magistrate's office had arrived, and their attitude had not seemed friendly. Cease rushed over looking pale, immediately certain some rich family had sent officials to drag Xiaofan in and extract the medicine recipe from him by force. Xiaofan leaned close to her ear and told her not to worry. He knew the head constable personally. The man called him Brother Lin. The warm breath against her ear turned her face pink. He patted her head, told her to stay and cook, and walked out with the 2 officers without looking back. Behind him, the entire village was torn between following and trying not to appear too invested in a 16-year-old boy's safety. Li Dani stirred the pot. Take your wages and run. He is obviously in trouble. Nobody moved. Then Li Ermazi stepped forward first. He had known Xiaofan since childhood. The boy was poor, but honest. He said he believed him, sent his wife to keep working under Shirshir, and walked away. Big Sister Li and the others followed. Every single worker stayed. An hour later in the constable's office, Bao Jiexing poured tea and sat across from Xiaofan with an expression that was equal parts awe and urgency. The 5 boxes of medicine had been used up completely. Several of his men had survived wounds that would otherwise have killed them. Then his expression shifted to something heavier. Brother Lin, I need to warn you about something. A group of roving bandits had appeared in the area, 30 or 40 men, cunning enough to attack and vanish before anyone could organize a response. They were specifically targeting constable officers, beating them badly but stopping short of killing, as if sending a deliberate message of contempt. And here was the part that made Xiaofan's stomach drop. You are the only person in town with hemostatic medicine. Bandits get hurt. If they find out about you, they will come looking. All the excitement Xiaofan had felt about the massive batch of medicine waiting at home evaporated instantly. 5 beautiful wives, a business just starting to grow, and killers who specifically targeted anyone they thought was worth robbing. First priority, he told himself quietly, grow quietly. Second priority, bodyguards. Bao Jiexing pulled out a banknote, 100 taels of silver. Payment in full for 100 boxes of medicine he had not even seen yet. He was handing over this much money on pure trust. Xiaofan stared at it for a moment, genuinely moved. He pocketed the note and made a silent promise to himself. He would help this man catch those bandits, not just out of gratitude, because helping the constable was also protecting himself. 100 taels. With this, he could buy the big house immediately. The girls would be thrilled. On the walk back, he ran into Uncle Da waiting just outside the magistrate's gate, the old man having run all the way to town out of worry. At over 60 years old, he had come to vouch for a 16-year-old boy. Xiaofan felt something warm settle in his chest. He suggested they walk around together. The chief pointed out a restaurant that had closed, a horse market that had been raided by bandits 5 years ago. That caught Xiaofan's attention. Bandits had come through here before. Last time, the government sent soldiers, archers and cavalry set an ambush and wiped them out in a single strike. But with the war dragging on, no soldiers were available now. Something clicked in Xiaofan's mind. Archers, that had been the key last time. Training archers took 2 or 3 years, and anyone who could shoot was already at the front lines. But training crossbowmen took days. In his previous life he had been fascinated by historical weapons. He knew crossbow designs by memory. With Li San's skill and Bao Jiexing's support, building them was not an impossible task. He smiled at Uncle Da and said simply, "Do not worry. I have a plan." That evening, Xiaofan delivered the 100 boxes to Bao Jiexing, who had brought his 2 officers along, and timed their arrival perfectly for breakfast. Cease had made stewed meat and fine grain. All three of them ate until Cease had to cook another batch. Bao Jiexing belched, leaned back, and said the last time he had eaten this well was after winning a major battle. He would be visiting around mealtime far more often. Before leaving, he offered to send 2 of his wounded officers to stay at Xiaofan's house as protection. They arrived that afternoon. Song Shan, the same man whose arm Xiaofan's medicine had saved outside the pharmacy, and Qianyu, tall and muscular with a bow on his back and an injured leg. Both were banged up. Both were still worth more in a fight than most healthy men in the village. That evening, Xiaofan gathered Uncle Die and the 2 officers and told the chief plainly what was coming. 30 to 40 bandits. A village killed 2 days ago. Government cannot send help. Bandits know it. The chief went pale. Last time they had not touched villages. This time was different. But Xiaofan already had a plan, and it was one that would serve him long after the bandits were gone. He proposed a village guard. 20 men, 20 women, voluntary, armed and trained within a week. Nobody would fight for money alone when their life was on the line. So the pay had to match the risk. 15 coins a day for men, 12 for women, plus full meals. More than 2 days of town work in a single day. Uncle Die stared at him for a long moment. Then the chief made his only suggestion: drop the meals. The expense would be too much. Xiaofan agreed and told him to call everyone together that night. Half an hour later, the village had gathered. The chief explained the bandit situation plainly, and the crowd shifted from relaxed to frightened. Xiaofan laid out the plan: build a guard, voluntary. He covers the weapons, but they follow his orders completely. Silence settled over the crowd. Protecting your family made sense. Stepping forward to be the first target of a blade did not. Then a young man with a square jaw and sharp eyes spoke up from the middle of the crowd. Li Hu, 16 or 17, built strong for his age, with the kind of voice that made the air feel slightly more serious. He looked at the crowd and said what none of them wanted to hear out loud. When bandits come, they do not ask who you are. They do not negotiate, and without grain, your family of 10 or 20 does not survive winter anyway. He pointed at Xiaofan. This man is paying out of his own pocket, and you are still hesitating. Then the chief announced the wages and the dam broke completely. Over 100 people signed up. Xiaofan and the chief screened them down to 60 based on physical ability, with testing scheduled for the next morning. Before the crowd dispersed, Xiaofan called one name: Li Hu. Starting today you are guard captain, 25 coins a day. Stay behind after everyone leaves. Li Hu's eyes lit up. He stood a little straighter. The next morning, 60 candidates followed Xiaofan to the hills behind the village in the early light. He ran them, 3 kilometers, then 5, then 8. Former soldiers kept pace with Li Hu all the way to the end. From men left standing, those for became squad leaders. The weightlifting test followed, and by the end of the day Xiaofan had his 40. 5 men and 5 women per squad. Meanwhile, that same afternoon, he sat down with Li San and spent hours describing a weapon this era had never seen. A repeating crossbow, compact, accurate to 20 zhang. Devastating power from the mechanism alone, without depending on the shooter's arm strength. Li San called him a genius for times during the explanation and tried to recruit him as a blacksmithing apprentice. Xiaofan turned him down. His plan since arriving in this world was to take it easy. Becoming a master craftsman was not that. 3 days later the house was purchased. 40 taels for the merchant's summer retreat at the base of the stone mine. Spacious, clean, with open land for the guard to train on and the mine right at the doorstep. They moved in during a cold rain that announced winter's arrival. The forb grass in the wild was dead. The medicine season was over for now. But the limestone operation was only growing and the guard trained every morning without fail. After 3 days of drills, Xiaofan could see the change in their bodies. Straighter spines, faster reflexes, something behind the eyes that had not been there before. Then one morning, Uncle Li San came running through the gate with dark circles under his eyes and a cloth bundle on his back. He had not slept. He pulled out a crossbow and shoved it into Xiaofan's hands. Xiaofan loaded it, aimed at a wooden post in the yard, and fired. The bolt buried itself a third of its length into the solid wood. Sure and Cease both gasped from behind him. Li San was practically shaking. Accurate within 20 zhang. Maximum range 40. 3 or 4 shots in 10 seconds if you were strong enough. A military archer needed a full year of training to reach that range and still mostly missed. This weapon could be learned in days. With this, the bandits are nothing, Xiaofan said. Li San immediately warned him. Never let the design leak. A weapon this powerful could change wars. Xiaofan already had an answer. Hire craftsmen and teach each one how to make just one or two components. Only Li San assembles the finished product. Nobody sees the full picture. Li San thought it over and nodded. The first crossbow went to Yin Yin. Xiaofan had decided that before it was even finished. She grabbed it and fired 5 shots at the post without hesitation, her first to hit the edges. The last 3 were extraordinary. 2 bolts landed directly on top of Xiaofan's, and the third split the gap between them. Li San stared. For a first-time user, that was not skill. That was something rarer. Songshan appeared from inside, jaw dropped. He had watched the whole demonstration. Brother Lin, this is better than anything at the magistrate's office. He was barely able to keep his voice steady. Then the question of production speed hit the room like cold water. Li San could build 1 crossbow per day at his current pace. That was far too slow. Xiaofan proposed division of labor. Split the parts between multiple workers. Have each person specialize in 1 component. Let Li San handle only the critical pieces and final assembly. Li San's eyes lit up. They called the garden, set up additional forges, assign 1 part per person. Songshan left for town to bring Bao Yexing back to see the weapon for himself. And then the yard was quiet. Just Xiaofan and Cease. She was standing with her head down, drawing circles on the ground with her toe, looking like she was about to cry. He walked up behind her and asked what was wrong. She looked up with red eyes. Husband, not like me. He kissed her, properly, for a long time. The bedroom door closed as the sun was setting. The golden afternoon light fell warm across the yard while the workers outside put in their final hour of effort before dark. The next morning Bao Yexing arrived at dawn, barely able to contain himself. Songshan had told him about the weapon, and he had not slept. He had run most of the way, and he had arrived right before breakfast, which Xiaofan suspected was not entirely a coincidence. He ate his fill, then stepped into the yard and watched Yin Yin demonstrate. 3 shots, rapid succession, 15 zhang out. All 3 bolts clustered so tightly in the center of the post they were nearly touching, each buried a third deep. Bao Yexing walked to the post, yanked 1 bolt out with effort, stared at the dark hole it left. 6 years on the battlefield. He knew instantly. He fired 2 shots himself, dead center both times. Then he looked at Xiaofan with something close to worship. He asked how it was made, then caught himself immediately and bowed an apology. He had gotten carried away. He asked instead if he could buy 5. Xiaofan told him this was still the only one, but once more were ready, he would have priority. That same morning, Xiaofan and Songshan rode to town on horseback to buy an ox cart. Yin Yin pressing the crossbow into Xiaofan's arms for protection before they left. He had never been on a horse before. It was nothing like he had imagined. No stirrups, no freedom. Just his internal organs attempting to relocate. He decided immediately he needed a proper carriage. Then both horses stopped hard. Up ahead on the road, a group of more than a dozen armed men stood blocking the path. Every one of them had a blade on his belt. Songshan said it quietly. Those are the bandits. Bao Yexing wheeled his horse around instantly. They cleared out before the bandits could organize a pursuit, riding hard until the armed men were far behind. Bao Yexing cursed bitterly. Bad timing. 1 trip short-handed and they walked straight into 30 armed killers. Then Xiaofan handed him the crossbow and asked a single question. Can you two do mounted archery? Both had trained for it in the military. The bandits had swords and no ranged weapons, no shields. No answer to anything coming from a distance. On horseback with the crossbow, this was not a fair fight. It was a harvest. Xiaofan told Songshan to ride while Bao Yexing shot. 2-man team, and hit hard out. He found cover in the trees and watched them go. What happened on that road Xiaofan only heard about afterward. But every word of it landed like a stone thrown in still water. Wolf Fang, the bald-scarred leader, recognized Bao Yexing riding back toward them and could not figure out what he was carrying. His second-in-command, still furious they had run earlier, charged forward with a blade before anyone could stop him. Bao Yexing raised the crossbow and fired. The bolt punched through the second-in-command's arm. He had been aiming for the chest, but at over 20 zhang, accuracy was not perfect. He did not stop to be disappointed. Second shot, a bandit dropped dead, bolt through the chest. The entire group dove behind rocks, but the mountain road was nearly flat with almost no real cover. In about 15 seconds, 4 more bandits were on the ground. Every shot hit. The bandits had spent years bullying unarmed villagers. They had no idea what to do when death was coming from a distance before they could close it. They argued behind their rocks. You go first. No, you go. Wolf Fang was the only one keeping his head. He saw Bao Yexing circling to their rear and understood instantly. If that man got behind them, nobody would walk away. He offered 15 taels for the first 3 men to charge, 30 to whoever killed the constable. The money finally broke through their fear, and several desperate men rushed out. Then Wolf Fang turned to his closest men and whispered one word: "Run." He left every charging man behind and bolted for the mountain. Bao Jiexing stood his ground and fired until the crossbow was empty. 12 shots. Most of the attackers were dead before the last bolt flew. The 3 or 4 survivors stared at him, threw down their swords, and ran. He drew his saber and rode them down. When it was over, more than 16 bodies lay scattered across the mountain road. Wolf Fang and a handful of men had vanished into the hills. With a second crossbow, they could have flanked him and ended it completely. But that was not a failure. It was a delay. Bao Jiexing returned the crossbow and bowed deeply. "Brother Lin, without you and this weapon, these bandits would have terrorized the region for years." Xiaofan pulled him up. "Getting rid of bandits is everyone's responsibility. I provided the weapon. You did the killing." Bao Jiexing looked at him like he was something between a genius and a saint. 16 kills. 5 taels per head. 80 taels in bounty money. Just for lending out a crossbow for a few minutes. In town to collect the bounty and buy his ox cart, Xiaofan walked into the cattle market and found 4 massive bulls near the back of the pens. 2 males to females, each with a few old scars. All for standing calm and quiet, flicking their tails, watching people with alert eyes. His heart started racing. He kept his face completely still. These were Qianshan yellow cattle, a breed from his previous world. Bigger and stronger and more disease-resistant than anything this era knew to breed. The market owner was treating them like well-fed ordinary cows. He had no idea what he had. Xiaofan offered a discount price. The owner had been sitting on them unsold for 2 months and jumped at the chance. 90 taels for animals that would haul twice the load of regular cattle and breed even better offspring. Songshen thought he had lost his mind spending that much. Xiaofan just smiled and paid. But the day was not finished. At the magistrate's office, Xiaofan walked in to find Liu Li, mother of the Liu Ergu who had caused trouble before, holding court in the hallway. She had come up behind Xiaofan and Yin Yin at the market earlier and unleashed a stream of insults, loud enough for half the street to hear. Her son Ergu stood behind her grinning, while she called Xiaofan's wives worthless, accused him of theft, and told the crowd he could not possibly afford anything he was buying. Songshen had shown his badge. She had slapped it out of his hand, stomped on it twice, and spat on it, declaring it a forgery because no real officer would be wandering a cattle market. Now she was trying to beg a favor from Constable Jin, a smooth-talking officer who got along with everyone and owed her some kind of distant family connection. Xiaofan walked into the room and watched Constable Jin try to make the whole thing disappear. With a practiced smile and some carefully chosen words about family harmony, Ergu and his mother lit up. They thought the officer had just saved them. Xiaofan pulled his hand away from Qian's handshake and let cold fury fill his voice. She was his mother-in-law, yes, he could take personal insults. But she had not just attacked him. She had put a government badge on the ground and ground it under her heel. He grabbed Songshan's sleeve and pulled it up, revealing the ugly scar where the bandit blade had nearly taken his arm. Officers like this man bled for this town, and these two had spat on the badge that represented every officer who had ever done the same. He raised his voice so everyone in the building could hear. "Tell me, do they deserve punishment or not?" The crowd erupted. Stones and whatever people had in their hands started flying at Liu Li and Ergu. Constable Jin stood frozen, his practiced smile completely gone. Then a booming voice rang out from behind the crowd. "Brilliant, Brother Lin, I have never admired anyone in my life except you." Bao Jiexing stepped into the room and clapped Xiaofan on the shoulder. Then he turned to the crowd and said he wanted to introduce someone. "Yesterday," he said, "this man helped kill 16 bandits." The room went electric. Xiaofan had only lent them the crossbow, but Bao Jiexing had just credited him with the kills. And nobody in that room was going to question the head constable's word. Constable Jin executed a masterful reversal in 3 seconds flat, bowing deeply and declaring that if he had known who Xiaofan was, he never would have gotten involved. Liu Li collapsed to her knees and started banging her forehead on the floor. Nobody felt sorry for her. The sentencing was handled by the law. Public provocation, 10 lashes, provoking an officer, 20. Destroying an official badge, 40. Xiaofan rode home on his new bull cart with Songshan, the road quiet after the morning's chaos, and felt something subtle in his chest that was difficult to name. Respect. Real respect. Not given out of fear or flattery, but earned. Back home, the first kiln was finished and workers were already building the second. Xiaoran ran to meet him at the gate, bright with news about the kiln being ready to fire. He kissed her before she could say another word and watched her turn pink all the way to her ears. That evening at Li San's workshop, crossbow production was gaining speed. After Xiaofan proposed a proper division of labor system, 5 dedicated smiths each specializing in a single component, the chaos became rhythm. By the end of the day they had 1 completed crossbow, and the pace would only improve. Li San tried one final time to recruit him. Xiaofan told him he was too lazy for the craftsman life and walked home humming. The bandit problem was almost handled. The limestone business was running. The house was bought. The guard was training. And at 16 years old, with a soul that had already lived 30 years of a grinding corporate life, he was finally, genuinely starting to feel like things might be good. What he did not know was that 4 men in the village were meeting that night in the dark, and every one of them wanted him dead. Li Daniu had been simmering for weeks. Xiaofan had taken his money. The gambling debt coming due would force him to sell his house or go to war. The 3 brothers, Li Zhengkai, Li Junhua, and Li Juning, were furious at being turned away from work that morning. They sat in Daniu's house that night, jealousy eating through them like rust through iron. Li Zhengkai fancied himself the smart one. He stroked his chin and announced his solution with dramatic weight. Kill with a borrowed knife. He had a distant relative whose uncle happened to be Wolf Fang, the bandit leader still alive somewhere in those mountains. The plan was simple. Send a letter through this relative. Tell the bandits Xiaofan was sitting on hundreds of taels of silver. Let the killers do the work. Steal the money in the chaos. Daniu worried about the village guard. Zhengkai laughed. Half women. A few days of training. Real bandits with real blades against farmers playing soldier. They would freeze at the first sight of blood. That same night, under a full moon, all 4 of them slipped out of the village to deliver their message. The next day on Wolfang Hill, the bandits were in a grim mood. 16 empty seats in the cave. The second in command was gone. He had bled out from the arrow wound. Survivors wanted to hide. Wolfang smashed his wine bowl on the ground and told them one small setback did not end their war. When his nephew Zhang Jun arrived with information about a limestone miner in Li family village, sitting on hundreds of taels, Wolfang listened carefully. The bandits were nervous after the road ambush. They had never faced ranged weapons before. They did not want to go out again so soon. But Wolfang made the argument that made the math work. 1 rich target is safer than raiding 5 poor villages, and right after losing so many men. Bao Jiesheng thinks we are finished. His guard is down. 1 by 1. The bandits agreed. Tomorrow they would go all in. Xiaofan sneezed that afternoon in his recliner, sun on his face, Shushu rubbing his shoulders. Cease bringing fruit and water. He muttered that someone must be thinking about him. He had no idea how right he was. That evening Yinyan burst through the door with 3 veterans from the guard, each carrying a brand new crossbow just finished by Li San's crew. 3 crossbows now total. They practiced in the yard until the overcast sky made it impossible to see. The veterans were already hitting targets at 20 zhang 5 or 6 times out of 10. After 2 hours. Not Yinyan's level. Not even close. But enough. Xiaofan told Yinyan to practice well, and there would be a reward waiting for her tonight. Her face went crimson. The 3 soldiers politely looked at the ground. Before dawn the bandits sharpened their blades, marched out of the cave, and Wolfang swung his knife in the cold air. Take Li family village. Xiaofan woke up exhausted and late, Shushu dragging him out of bed for breakfast. Li Hu arrived with 2 veterans wanting to try the crossbow in the yard. Li Hu's strength was something else entirely. He could cock the bowstring with 1 hand. Within half an hour he was firing for shots in 10 seconds. Xiaofan tried it himself. Needed for seconds just to pull the string back once and put it down. Then came pounding on the door, and Uncle Da's voice, high and desperate. Xiaofan, bandits, the bandits are here. Xiaofan looked through the window. A crowd of armed men was heading down the road toward his house. Already less than 100 meters out. The guard was on the back hill for morning training. No time to call them back before the bandits arrived. He forced himself to breathe. Songshen, how many? Started over 40. Lost 16 on the road. Roughly 30 left. For crossbows. A handful of fighters they could hold but not destroy. And if any survivors escaped, they would come back. Best option, scare them first. Set the trap, and it clean. Li Hu, crossbow, go. Get the guard, now. Li Hu took off at a sprint toward the back hill. Everyone else, load and ready. When the bandits reached 10 paces, Xiaofan signaled Yinyan. She fired 1 bolt into the ground at Wolfang's feet. The front row flinched backward. Wolfang's eyes swept across the 4 crossbows and went still. He recognized the weapon, the same one that had killed 16 of his men on that road. If you are here for money, turn around, Xiaofan said. Crossbow aimed at Wolfang's skull from 10 paces. Li family village is not an easy target. Wolfang swallowed. He counted for crossbows against 30 men and calculated. At 10 paces, One volley, and they could close the gap. They would probably win. But the first one shot would be him. He sneered. Hand over 500 taels, and we leave forever. Xiaofan let his face waver. Let just enough hesitation show to make the bandit leader think the threat was working. He turned to Shirshir and said softly, "Go inside and get 500 taels." She understood immediately. What she went inside to do was not count silver. It was signal the guard already hiding throughout the courtyard. Li Hu had reached the back hill and back in 7 or 8 minutes. Every fighter was in position, crouched behind trees, water barrels, doorways, waiting. Shirshir came back empty-handed and whispered, "Everything is ready." Xiaofan let a cold smile spread across his face. "You think I am stupid," he said to Wolf Fang. "Yes, that is exactly what I think." He pulled the trigger. The bolt flew straight at Wolf Fang's face. He dove behind another bandit just in time. The bolt grazed his ear and killed the man behind him. 3 more crossbows fired at the same moment. 3 more bandits dropped. Wolf Fang touched his bleeding ear, and the calm in his eyes cracked open into pure rage. Kill them all. 30 bandits charged, certain they could close the 10-pace gap before a second volley. 3 seconds later, Yin Yan's second bolt took down the lead runner. Before anyone could understand how she had reloaded that fast, 3 more bolts flew. 3 more bodies hit the dirt. "Fall back into the yard," Xiaofan said, voice steady. As the bandits poured through the gate, for more bolts met them. For more screams. And then the trap sprung. From behind every tree stump, barrel, and doorway, over 40 armed guards erupted into the yard at once, outnumbering the bandits 2 to 1, front line wearing makeshift armor, blades already drawn. Wolf Fang understood in an instant what had happened. He looked at the bodies, looked at the guard closing in, looked at the door behind him. Without a word to his men, he slipped out of the yard and ran. 2 bandits followed him. The rest stood there leaderless, all the fight gone from their eyes, surrounded, with nowhere to run. The battle of the courtyard was already over. It just had not officially ended yet. Songshan spotted Wolf Fang sprinting for the tree line and looked at Xiaofan. "Brother Lin, the leader is running. Let me go." "Take to squad leaders and go." Songshan to captains, and the crossbow he had grabbed went after them. Wolf Fang and the 2 bandits were already several hundred meters ahead, racing for the forest where crossbows would be useless. Songshan was running at full speed, arms still healing from the slash wound, firing as he went. He hit 1 fleeing bandit, cocked again with his injured arm biting down on the pain. Hit the second. Wolf Fang had no more cover. The tree line was 5 steps away. At nearly 40 zhang, even Bao Jiexing would have struggled with that shot. Wolf Fang leaped toward the trees. The bolt caught him in the left shoulder, punching clean through. Just as he disappeared into the forest. "He's hit," Songshan shouted, and all 3 plunged after him following the blood trail to the Qianzi River. A 10-meter drop into fast current, bolt through the shoulder, arm useless. Wolf Fang jumped anyway. Back in the yard, the fight was finished. Most bandits lay dead. 2 were taken prisoner. Xiaofan stood in the yard, face pale, watching the aftermath. 6 guards had been wounded. 6 others had frozen and never come out to fight. Li Hu reported it with a tight jaw. A knife wound on his own arm from the tension of his first real battle. Xiaofan told him it was not his fault. Some people froze when they saw blood for the first time. That was normal. He paid the 6 who had frozen their wages and told them they were done. They begged for another chance. He held firm, rules were rules. Other jobs might open later. But not this one. Then the prisoner spoke. Zhang Jun, Wolf Fang's nephew. The young man who had never robbed anyone before and had been thrilled by the idea of it. Until this morning. He collapsed, wet himself, and started talking so fast the words nearly tripped over each other. "A man in your village sent me to the bandits. Li Zhongkai, he wrote a letter. I still have it. He told them you made dozens of taels every day. That is why we came here so soon after losing those men on the road." Xiaofan went cold. If the crossbow production had been 2 or 3 days slower, every person in that yard would be dead. The village chief shook with fury. The villagers wanted blood immediately. Qianyu, the government officer standing nearby, spoke flatly. Conspiring with bandits was a capital crime under national law. Whatever Xiaofan decided, he would not interfere. Xiaofan sent Li Hu to bring in the 3 brothers and Daniel. Li Zhongkai tried to deny everything when they dragged him into the yard. He called it a frame-up, turned to the crowd and performed his innocence with real conviction. Then Xiaofan held up the letter. A scrap of cloth with a rough map of his house's location and a few sentences in Zhongkai's handwriting. Zhongkai's face finally cracked. He stammered that it was forged, that Zhang Jun had copied his writing. The crowd had heard enough. Songshan returned from the river carrying severed heads. The bandits who had fled with Wolf Fang. Wolfang had jumped from the cliff into the rapids with a bolt through his shoulder, and a 10-meter drop. Songshan gave him no odds of surviving that. The bandit crisis was essentially over. For the three brothers and Daniel, there was no argument left that could carry weight. Songshan produced his badge and stated the law cleanly. Conspiring with bandits, capital offense. He had authority to carry out the sentence. For the first time, Li Zhengkai had nothing to say. He understood now why the bandits had walked into a trap. The man he had tried to have killed had government officers stationed in his house. All the fight went out of him. He crumpled. 3 screams, 3 heads hit the ground. Xiaofan did not feel guilty. If those crossbows had been finished days later, those screams would have been his wives. Zhang Jun told Xiaofan everything about the hideout. No guards left. Every bandit had come here. Xiaofan sent Li Hu with half the guard and the bull cart to haul back what was there. Before he left, Xiaofan leaned close and whispered, "Kill the prisoner when you are done." He had promised not to kill Zhang Jun himself. He had not said anything about Li Hu. By evening they brought back over 100 she of grain, worth 70 or 80 taels at market. Xiaofan gave every guard member 60 jin of grain as a reward, and told them all to take 2 days off. First real combat for most of them. They needed space to put it somewhere in their minds. Songshan and Qianyu left for town to handle their resignations from the magistrate's office. Xiaofan had offered them 30 coins a day, double their current salary, and meals with meat every day on top of that. Songshan had shaken his head twice. Then Qianyu had looked at him, and they had both dropped to one knee at the same time. "Brother Lin, from today on we follow you. You say east, we go east. No questions." 2 skilled fighters and bodyguards at 60 coins a day total, worth every copper. The yard was quiet after everyone left. Just Xiaofan and Shishir in the last of the afternoon light. "Husband, you are incredible," she said, eyes shining. "The government could not stop those bandits for years. You did it in 10 days. He pulled her into his arms. She blushed and then noticed nobody was around and got bold. "Whatever you want," she said, and wrapped her arms around his waist and kissed him. He carried her inside and kicked the door shut. "It is still daytime," she protested weakly. "Nobody is here," he said, and then her face crumbled and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Husband, what if the rumors are true? What if we cannot have children? At the next election, maybe you should choose other women who..." He kissed her before she could finish, long and hard enough that neither of them could speak afterward. "Do not ever say that again," he told her. "I have 5 wives. That is already more than I can keep up with. If you are not pregnant yet, that just means I need to try harder. 1 time does not work. We try twice. 10 times does not work. 20. I refuse to believe nothing will grow." She looked up at him through her tears. That afternoon the bedroom door stayed closed for a very long time. 10 days passed after the battle, and the village felt like a different place. The guard kept training every morning. The limestone kilns ran without stopping. Songshan came back once during that stretch and brought 150 taels in bounty money for the killed bandits. The Qianshan bulls proved their worth immediately. Each one hauled as much as 2 regular cattle, worth every coin spent. The second kiln was nearly finished, twice the size of the first. With both running, production would more than double. Li San's crossbow workshop had settled into a steady rhythm. 6 workers, each specializing in one component, producing 5 crossbows a day now. After several rounds of improvements, accurate range had pushed out to 25 zhang, and each weapon now held 10 bolts, instead of 8. Standing in his yard one afternoon, Xiaofan looked at the operation spreading around him and understood something clearly. He had started with a crumbling shack, a sickly body, 5 wives everyone had given up on, and a folk remedy his grandmother used to cut his childhood medical bills. Now he had a household, a guard force, a limestone operation, a weapons workshop, connections to the magistrate's office, and more silver than his old village had seen in years. But this world did not stay still. Bandits came back. Traitors hid inside the village walls. Powerful people noticed when someone beneath them started rising. He needed to keep building. More guards, better equipment, a long-term partner for the limestone trade at the upcoming Jiaoshan Trade Fair, coal to replace the trees they were burning through to fast for kiln fuel, and children, the one thing all 5 of his wives wanted and worried about in the quiet moments between everything else. The rumors that circulated about them being unable to bear children were not based on anything real, just cruelty that filled the space where kindness could have gone. He was not worried about it. He simply planned to try harder. That was, after all, his approach to everything. Yin had watched over his shoulder through all of it. The medicine, the bandits, the guard, the crossbow training. She had told herself she would give him a son no matter what. pressing her palm flat against her stomach when she thought nobody was looking. Cease had finally stopped pricking herself with the sewing needle. Every time she thought about where he was, mostly because he was home now. Xiaoran ran the kilns with a quiet confidence that had replaced all her earlier doubt. Xiaoqian kept the ledgers without a single complaint, muttering only once that she just wanted a good life, then turning red at how much that admission revealed. Shershur led the herb-gathering crews, managed the household, smoothed over every moment of friction between the others, and still found time to worry about him constantly. 5 women who had been given nothing by the world and were building something real inside it, together. There was one more thing Xiaofan was turning over in his mind those 10 days. The crossbow design was extraordinary by any standard of this era, and Li San knew it. The old blacksmith had bit his tongue more than once. Xiaofan could see it in his eyes when he looked at a 16-year-old boy describing mechanisms that generations of craftsmen had never conceived. Li San wanted to give the design to the government, to the military, to the soldiers dying at the front lines without good weapons. He had watched too many comrades die there. He carried that weight like a stone in his chest. Xiaofan understood. He carried it differently. The knowledge in his head came from centuries of accumulated human effort in another world. He was not a genius. He was borrowing from people far smarter than him. And eventually he would run out of things to borrow. But while it lasted, he intended to use every bit of it. Not to become a master craftsman. Not to be famous. Not to change the course of a war he had arrived into the middle of. Just to live well, to protect the people under his roof. To build something that did not collapse the moment he stopped pushing it. He lay in his recliner in the autumn sun, Shershur at his shoulders, Cease bringing water. The smell of something good coming from the kitchen. And felt something he had spent 30 years in his last life chasing and never quite catching. Enough? Not perfect. Not finished. Not safe from everything the world still had planned. But enough. He looked up at the sky, freshly washed blue after the last cold rain, and wondered when a person was supposed to stop being surprised that things could actually be good. Somewhere far above him, on Wolfing Hill, an empty cave sat with 16 cold seats and grain that was no longer there. Somewhere in town, Liu Li and her son sat nursing their wounds and reconsidering the entire direction of their lives. Somewhere in the village, Lier Mazi walked with his head a little higher, because he had made one decent decision at the right moment, and it had mattered. And somewhere in the ledger Xiaoqian kept in her careful handwriting, a number was growing that none of them had dared imagine when they had nothing. The medicine would come back in the spring when the forb grass grew again. The kilns would run through winter and into spring, building a stockpile that would make the Jiaoshan trade fair worthwhile. The crossbow workshop would keep producing, quietly, with each part made by a different hand so no single person outside the household knew the full picture. The guard would train every morning and get better every week, turning into something that looked less like farmers with weapons and more like people who had decided they would not lose again. And one morning, probably soon, one of his wives would come to him with news that would make everything feel even more worth it. He was patient. He had already done the work. The last thing that needed tying was the connection that had made all of this possible. Bao Tieshing had called him Brother Lin from the moment the medicine worked. He had paid in advance on pure trust. He had sent his best wounded officers as protection. He had credited Xiaofan publicly with kills he had not personally made. That kind of person was worth more than money, worth more than connections, worth more than any single weapon or recipe or business deal. Xiaofan had made a quiet note of that and intended to honor it. He would help with the bandits who might still be out there. He would share the crossbow design with the magistrate's office when the time was right. He would be the kind of partner that made Bao Tieshing look good, because that was how trust survived long enough to matter. The sun moved across the yard in its slow afternoon arc, and the workers filed past the gate on their way home, shoulders loose, a few of them humming. Xiaofan watched them go and thought, this is what it looks like when something is working. Not triumph, not arrival, just evidence that the direction was right and the foundation was holding. What had started as a crumbling shack and a stubborn folk remedy had grown into a household, a guard, a workshop, and a web of trust that bandits and traders had both tried to break. Both had failed. The traders were gone. The bandits were scattered. Their leader last seen bleeding in the Qianzi River rapids with a bolt through his shoulder, and no chance of soft landing. The village was safer than it had been before any of this started. And Xiaofan was 16 years old in a world where most people his age were still being told what they would never have. He had already decided that list did not apply to him. The medicine was real. The weapons were real. The people who had chosen to trust him had not been wrong to do so. Big Sister Li had stayed when it would have been easier to take her wages and walk. Lier Mazi had spoken up when jealousy would have been more convenient. Songshan and Qianyu had knelt and meant it. All of them had made a bet on a 16-year-old from a broken-down shack with no family name and no backing. He intended to make that bet pay out for every one of them. More workers when the operation needed it. Wages that kept rising as the business did. Bonuses that showed up without being asked for. Grain when winter pressed hard. That was the plan he had never written down but had held in his chest since the morning. He decided he would not live poor again. He went inside for dinner as the sky turned orange and the first stars appeared at the edge of it. Cease had made something that filled the house with warmth before anyone sat down. All 5 of them were already at the table. Shirshir had set his chopsticks at the right angle without being asked. Yin Yin was pretending she had not been watching the door. Xiaoran had her hands folded neatly on her lap the way she did when she was happy. Xiaoqian was looking at the ledger one more time. Cease came through the kitchen door with the pot and smiled the moment she saw him. He sat down. Someone passed him a bowl. Someone else poured his water. This was what he had crossed worlds and survived a sickly body and a famine season, and a band of killers in his front yard to get to. A table, a meal, 5 women who had chosen him as much as he had chosen them. Not wealth yet, though that was coming. Not safety yet, though that was coming too. Just this, enough of it tonight to matter. He picked up his chopsticks. Outside, the guard made their final rounds of the village. Torches moving in slow arcs past the new house, past the kilns, past the gate where an old chief had waited for a boy he believed in. In the workshop, 5 crossbows sat completed and ready, with more parts being cut and shaped for the morning shift. In the ledger on the table beside Xiaoqian's elbow, a number that had started at 0 weeks ago was now large enough to change what the word impossible meant. Across the village, workers who had eaten meat at someone else's expense and received grain bonuses they had not expected were going to sleep with something they had not felt in a long time. Security, not certainty. Nothing in this world offered that, but security. The sense that tomorrow was more likely to be all right than not. Xiaofan had given that to 40 families in a village that had spent years just trying to survive the season. It had cost him real money and real risk and real sleepless nights pressing herb juice by hand until his wrist ached. He would do it again. He was going to keep doing it in larger quantities with better tools to more people, until the word poor stopped meaning inevitable in the place he had decided to call home. That was the plan, simple enough to fit in one sentence, hard enough to take a lifetime. He was not in a hurry. He had already proven the medicine worked. He had already proven the weapons worked. He had already proven the people around him were worth trusting and being trusted by. What came next was just doing it again, bigger, until it was impossible to ignore. The trade fair at Jiaoshan was coming. A long-term limestone buyer would change the revenue picture entirely. Coal supply lines would solve the kiln fuel problem and let them cut wood consumption before the nearby hills went bare. Spring would bring the 4-herb grass back. More medicine. Better packaging now that Li San had a rhythm with the bamboo tubes. And somewhere in all of that, in the ordinary weeks between the crises, one of his wives would come to him with news that would change the shape of the household forever. He was not worried about when. He was not worried about much at all tonight, which was itself a kind of miracle for a man who had spent 30 years in his last life worrying about everything. Yin Yin caught him smiling at nothing and raised an eyebrow. He told her he was just thinking. She told him thinking too much was bad for his health. He agreed and paid no attention whatsoever. The meal ended. The table was cleared. The torches outside made slow circles in the dark. Xiaofan stepped into the yard and stood for a moment in the cold air, looking at the shape of what he had built. 2 kilns. One almost finished second kiln beside it. A guardhouse in progress. A crossbow workshop running at Li San's place down the road. A village that was not the same as it had been the morning he had decided to start. He went back inside. Songshan and Qianyu were installed, fed, and ready. The guard was trained. The bandits were gone or broken. The next problem had not shown its face yet. It would. This world did not offer long rest to anyone building something worth taking. But when it came, he would have more to answer it with than he had the last time. And the time after that, more still. That was the only real strategy he had ever had in either lifetime. Keep moving. Keep building. Keep the people you trust closer than the problems you have not solved yet. He had crossed from one world into another with nothing but borrowed time and a borrowed body, and 30 years of a life he had almost wasted. He did not intend to waste this one. Shirshir appeared at the bedroom doorway, hair down, lamp held low, saying nothing, just looking at him with the particular expression she had when she wanted to say something, and could not find the words for it. He walked toward her. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. The kilns would fire at dawn. The guard would run their drills. The workshop would open, and Li San would complain about something, and then solve it better than expected. The village would wake up and go to work, and come home and eat well for once. And Xiaofan would be there in the middle of all of it. The same boy everyone had written off. The same man no one had seen coming. Doing it again. The lamplight caught Shishi's face as he reached her, and she finally smiled. "Come inside," she said softly. "It is cold out here." He followed her and pulled the door shut behind him. Outside, the village guard made their final pass, quiet and steady in the dark. In the cave on Wolfang Hill, 16 empty seats sat in silence. In the ground beneath the yard, roots of something that had not yet grown pressed quietly against the soil, waiting for spring. This story had started with a sickly boy in a broken house, who could not afford to be treated by a doctor. It would not end there. Not even close. He had medicine that could save lives and a weapon no one had thought to build, and a family that had chosen each other when the world had not chosen any of them. He had a blacksmith who could not stop trying to recruit him, a constable who called him brother, and a village that had started waking up half an hour early just to get to work on time. He had 6 gin of grain that had once been the difference between eating and not, and 100 tales that had once been unimaginable, and a ledger that kept growing with every box of green powder that went out the door. All of it built from a weed nobody wanted, and a remedy his grandmother had taught him in another lifetime. That was the thing about starting with nothing. Everything you built from it was proof that nothing was never the end. It was just the starting point no one could take credit for giving you. Lin Xiaofan had arrived in this world without asking to. He had been handed a broken body, a crumbling house, and a season about to turn cold. He had turned them into a medicine business, a guard force, a limestone operation, a weapons workshop, and a household full of people who trusted him with their futures. Not because he was the strongest man in the village or the most connected, or the best trained for any of it. Because he had decided, very early and very quietly, that the version of this life where he gave up was simply not one he was willing to live. The bandits had come and been driven back. The traitors had been found and answered for. The medicine had worked and the weapons had fired true, and the people he had bet on had not let him down. That was enough to go on. More than enough. Winter settled over Li family village with the particular weight of a season. That test everything built in warmth. The kilns held. The household held. The guard held its post every morning without being asked twice. Inside the house, 5 women slept under one roof and planned quietly for spring, each of them carrying something they had not had before Xiaofan arrived. Hope, the specific kind that does not ask for guarantees. The kind that just keeps showing up to work. And in the middle of all of it, Lin Xiaofan slept better than he had into lifetimes. Because in this world, unlike the last one, the things he was building were real, and the people sharing them with him had chosen to be there. That made all the difference in the world.